Welcome to the Myofascial Health Podcast, hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes' myofascial release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my myofascial release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health Podcast. Now, I am joined here by a very special guest. He's been a MFR therapist and in the community for quite some time. He's been a physical therapist for over 40 years. He's had his own private practice since 1999. He's produced the Fireside Chat and the MFR1 DVD course. And he's also written the book called The Music of Consciousness and the Art of Myofascial Release. It's my honor to introduce Richard Harty. Thank you so much for hopping on this podcast.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I've really appreciated your enthusiasm and your love for this work. And so it's a privilege to come and speak with you.
The privilege is all mine. I've seen your work or seen you post. I've never gotten the chance to meet you in person or have a conversation. And it's just cool that technology now has allowed us to have this little conversation. Now, can you tell me how you got into myofascial release?
Sure. My partner had done a substitute therapy stint at another clinic, and they had just gone to the Myofascial Release 1 course. And when she came back, she just shared the basic principles. She said, you engage the barrier, you don't force, and you hold for a long time. And so I had a pretty deep background in manual therapy because when I went through PT school, we were taught by Norwegian teachers, and it was fully available in Norway at the time, and it was just emerging into the United States practice. And so I knew all these really cool glides and techniques, but we were taught to do them with thrust, and you had grade 1 through 5. And it made sense, but I just wasn't getting the results, that consistently. And so when she told me about this, I said, well, I'm going to try this. And so instead of doing the thrust, I would take the MOB into the glide I wanted to do, and I would just hold and wait. And lo and behold, I just would feel it start to shift like taffy. And so I actually played with this for about a year, and I was getting way better results, and I refined a lot of my manual therapy techniques. And I was also going through some personal transitions too. I was doing some work based on the human potential movement out of Esalen. And so I grew up essentially in a cult. And so I was starting to have some anxiety attacks. And so I was doing some parallel work there with a very dear mentor of mine, and he basically had tricked me to getting into therapy because my ego at the time would not have allowed me to go, but that shift was happening at the same time. And so I was getting the mechanical results that I wanted, and just those basic techniques, and it was very powerful. And then I broke down. I said, I guess I can spend some money and I'll go to a class. So we went to the class in Monterey when they were still having it there in Monterey. It was only about 40 students there, and we were right on the coast. And John comes in with sunglasses on, and I go, what the heck? But I had an awakening, and I just felt, I was doing this parallel emotional work, and I was doing the understanding of the mechanical work. And at the end of the MFR1 class, he demonstrated unwinding. And when I saw that, something clicked, and I knew what that was. And it just opened up to me. I said, oh, we can address healing not just on the physical level. We can really address it on the emotional and energetic level. And I had never seen a practical application of that. And so after that class, all of a sudden I had clients starting to unwind on me, and pretty dramatically. And I didn't perceive that I had done anything different, but I think I got a download. And so pretty soon the ability to do that healing work in a traditional clinic just become narrower and narrower and narrower. And so I sold my traditional practice, and then I started doing, one patient at a time for an hour, one-on-one, cash-based business, and I'm much happier. And so in a short kind of story, that's how I got into where I'm at now.
I love that. Now, something that you mentioned was this thrusting technique. It's called an HVLA, high velocity, low amplitude thrust. And it's graded between 1 and 5. And that's the way that us as PTs will learn that. It's kind of more traditionally taught in chiropractic school. So when Richard is mentioning that, that's what he's talking about. But what you intuitively knew is, hey, there's something more to that. I'm getting limited results. And honestly, there was a time when I was early on in my career where I wanted to do the thrust and get the crack. And more than anything, that was for my own ego to be like, look how great I am. I can get this pop, But you kind of know that that doesn't hold for very long because you're doing something on the table. And almost always, once that patient steps up or gets up off the table and gravity gets reintroduced into their system, that is the world that they live in. And it's not this laying down on the table. And then it was cool for you to share your MFR1 experience in Monterey. And I think John has a way of making an introduction that gets us to say, whoa, who's this guy? A little bit of confusion there. I know I had that same thought when I was like, man, this dude's got a ponytail and all this other stuff. And then you saw unwinding for the first time. And I love that you said that I know what this is. You had a deeper knowing. You said you had an awakening during the seminar series and you just knew. Whereas for me, I think I just hit that snooze button a couple of times. I saw it, I was not in tune, or I didn't grasp onto it as quickly as you did. But you kind of knew that there was a sense of there's something more beyond the physical body. There's something more than we learned in school, even though we're qualified to help people and we gather these great manual skills in using our hands. I think we have a natural inclination to want to use our hands. And then John has allowed us to be artists with his work. And then you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
Once you saw that, hey, there's this unwinding process without you trying to do anything extra, you're like, oh, wow, now my patients are starting to do this unwinding, right? Once you saw that, hey, I could create a practice that I feel fulfillment with and not get burnt out at the end of the day and take cash paying patients or clients and they're willing to pay me, I can end my day in bliss, versus the traditional way we're taught is, hey, you got to take insurance. You got to treat multiple patients in the same hour. And by the way, you're not getting paid for documentation, but you have to document everything that you've done. So thank you for giving us that quick and dirty review of your journey. I know that there's a lot of spaces to fill in. So let's go ahead and fill that in a little bit. So, I think something that you had mentioned is when you were starting your practice, you were able to learn from massage therapists in terms of, hey, people are paying them cash. Like you just didn't know that that was possible. Can you talk us through that part of your journey? If you can get back to, hey, I'm ready to give up this traditional practice and I want to start this new thing.
So what I noticed, and I have this principle, people ask me, well, how do you market it? I says, well, just be the best you can be, because word of mouth with this work spreads so quickly. If you master this, I have, you generally 3-month waiting list. And if I treat somebody new, they tell their family, because it's so profound and it's such a deep shift that it can occur even in one visit. But the secret for me has been to do my own work. So like you mentioned, I got this download or this awakening in the class. That's the true learning. It's not the stuff I deduced with my brain. It was softening into the experience and there's a deep intelligence in the fascia, in the mind. The intuition basically intelligence is recognizing patterns. And you have to soften your focus to see patterns. If you try and deduce it, it's just going to slow your mind down so much that you're going to miss half the input because you're just going step by step and you're missing all this stuff that's rushing in. And so when I let go of my fear, which fear just takes up all the bandwidth, and fear is only good as if you're actually in danger, you need to run. You don't have time to analyze anything and you just got to go. But we have all these stories that are running in our head. And so as I awaken to my own stories and begin to do my work and set down these stories and realize they're illusions and they're not true, then I found this indescribable, deep wisdom that only gives you what you need in the moment. It doesn't give you what you need in the future, or it has nothing to say about the past. And so that has been when I'm there, and I don't know what's going to happen when my patient comes in. And that's what I concentrate on, is just really softening so that that mastery can come through. And when it does, phenomenal stuff happens every time. And then when a patient experiences that, it's so different than anything most people have experienced. They just tell everybody. And so I figured, well, if a massage therapist can do a massage, which is great, but it's not at the level of what happens when you do a myofascial release experience, then you just get a multiply. It just multiplies in terms of people who want to come in. And so one of the things I do in my practice, I have a lot of therapists that come and see me. And I give them priority because if I treat a therapist and they awaken, that affects a lot more people. And so I have a heart for therapists, and I know what it's like to have performance anxiety and the pressure to develop a practice. And, we have deep, caring hearts, and we want to do the best we can for our patients. And that can feel very heavy. And so the gift that John's given me is to make that light and to trust that we don't need to be fixed. We just need to be awakened. And once you awaken that part of yourself, it's amazing the gifts that each person has, and they're so unique and they're so beautiful. And I mean, all day, I don't go a day generally without a patient hugging me and say they love me. I mean, it's that profound. And so, and that happens not because I study more or because I know more knowledge. It's because I soften and trust and open. And as I've done this, I realize it's infinite. There's no limit. You can continue to soften in infinity. And so once you realize that and you just do a little bit more every day, and it brings a new adventure, brings a new awareness. And so life all of a sudden becomes extremely interesting. And so I just have so much gratitude and joy most of my day. So I don't know if
I
that answers your question, but
No, it absolutely does. I think a lot of times, especially those of us who are starting our own MFR businesses or practices, there's going to be a lot of fears or channel 5 of, hey, am I good enough? Have I been doing this long enough? Does the client believe in me? When you have been able to, I guess, intuitively followed, like, as long as I soften and I let them have their own experience, and I don't say, hey, this is the way it's supposed to be done or this and that, you have been able to pick up smaller things that you can't be taught, right? One thing with myofascial release is it's an art. It's an art form. And so just kind of like how you had mentioned, everyone has their own gifts. And it's important to recognize that, because it's easy to do this channel 5 thing, which is comparison, right? And saying, oh
right.
man, Richard has been doing this for over 40 years and he even treats therapists. Who am I to say that I can do this and start? Versus just being like, hey, I have my own gifts and I can help different patients. And the more we can help, it's not a competition, right? Just because
Not at
Richard
all.
has patients doesn't mean that I'm not going to have patients. And that, I think, is a key distinction, because I think there are a lot of fears, especially around, like, I'm in Austin, Texas, and it would be
Mhm.
very easy for me to say, man, there's so many MFR therapists here. Who am I to say that I can start a practice when there's so many qualified therapists doing this at a high level? And that's me comparing and then speaking to these channel 5 fears, when in reality, it's there's more than enough people that we can help with. And there's
Really.
going to be different people that we resonate with. And so someone might resonate with me more than Richard, or with Richard more than me. And it doesn't mean that any of us are lesser than the other person.
Not
And
at all.
but it's important because I think you also have this awareness of your internal dialogue of these stories that you tell yourself. And I think with something that John says is you can only take someone as far as you've gone. And so you had
Exactly.
mentioned that when you were taking MFR1, you were kind of doing this deeper inner healing work as you were learning to process things and becoming aware of things. And then without awareness, there's no choice, as John has often mentioned. And so once we
Hmm.
become aware of that stuff, once we become aware of these intrusive thoughts, these negative thoughts, then we have a choice. Then we can say, hey, do I want to just keep this pattern that I've been telling myself, or do I want to make a different choice? And I think with someone like myself, where I do want to have that certainty, I want to know the answer, that oftentimes gets in the way. And something that you mentioned is as I've learned more to soften, then I've become more awakened. And it's not a, hey, this is the path to awakening. It's what can I let go of? What can I let go of? And then what then becomes revealed to me. And so it's an important reminder for especially new therapists, but even old therapists, where, hey, if you know what you're going to do before you enter the room, you've already gotten the wrong first step. And so it's just becoming more present, more aware, and awareness is a synonym for centered, right? The more centered you are is the more awareness you have, and those subtler things help guide your intuition versus the loud channel 5 voice that we often hear in our own heads. Now, you have a background in more of the sciences. I think before we
Hmm.
started this call, you had said you had been more scientific. You were kind of going into sports medicine, and that was my original direction as well. You also have a background in software engineering. You said your brother was a video producer and you're an audio engineer. What was the transition of going from this, I would say, channel 5 to more channel 3? And just as a reminder for the audience, channel 5 is more like your left brain. It's your linear side, logical, brash. Usually it's impulsive. And this is where fear tends to be. And channel 3 is more of your softer side. It's more creative, intuitive, more pattern recognition. And this is where love is thought to be. So can you talk about how you transitioned from being more channel 5 to channel 3?
Sure. Well, to go back to some of the emotional work I was doing with a mentor, I had an anxiety attack one time because I had my traditional practice. I was working 11-hour days. I had, employees, and I had to come up with 25,000 a month just to break even.
Wow.
And so I was, and I thought this was the dream, and I was just driving to work, and I had never had this happen. I thought I was going to get in an accident any second, and I knew it was happening, and I couldn't stop it. And I pulled over to the side of the road, and it was just, and I just, I have this will, so I just willed myself back to driving to the work, and I worked in an anxiety attack all day. That was a Thursday, and then the same thing happened on Friday, and I made it to the weekend, and I just finally it was Sunday, and I just sat on the bed, and for the first time in my life, I just gave up. I said, I don't know where to go from here. I've exhausted. I didn't know I could be overcome so much by fear, because I always thought that I could figure out how to work my way through it. But this was just totally irrational, and I had no idea where it was coming from. And so that Monday, my friend Jerry came in with a shoulder problem, and he saw that I was reading a book by John Bradshaw on shame. And I was reading it so I could help other people. And so he was very tricky. He says, "Hey, maybe you could teach me a little bit about that book. I've been interested in the book. Why don't we get together and, you can tell me about what you're reading, And so he recognized something in me that I didn't. And he was such a unique individual. So I get there and I think I'm going to teach him a few things. And he had the skill to dialogue to take you into unwinding with just dialogue. And he had me sobbing in 15 minutes. And I just, that was magic to me. I said, but he opened up that wound that I didn't even know was there. And so at the end, he says, look, I'll work with you, but you have to promise me to never lie. And you can't lie intellectually. And I said, I can handle that. I've had that discipline my whole life. And he says, but you can't lie to me emotionally. So no hiding of emotions. If you're willing to do that, then I'll work with you. And so I was still embedded in a very shame-based cultic denominational religion that I grew up in. And so it took me 10 years of work to deconstruct that. But he took me to a retreat and they practiced some similar dialogue techniques, but it was in a group. And so the idea was if you've been wounded in community, you have to heal in community. And so my body went into full unwinding just with, he knew how to tap into the emotional core with his dialogue. And so that's why when I saw unwinding, I recognized what it was. And so I realized, oh, there's a whole different intelligence here. And this is definitely in an art because, they never said the same thing each time. There was no protocol. There was no formula with this work. And when you're in a group, just like when we're in class, that group powers the healing process. And so when I did that retreat, I literally felt like another person walked into my body. And so when I came down from that retreat, it was very soon after that I went to my first MFR class. And so I was primed. And so, but I wanted to comment on one of your things that we were talking about, because I get treated by other therapists and they aren't as experienced as me. But what I notice, I can feel when they soften and I can feel when their divine wisdom kicks in. And when I feel that, then I let go and I listen. Even though I'm quotes an expert, I come in and I'm a beginner when that shows up. And so what I tell my therapist, I says, you're either in it or you're out. So you don't have to wait to become labeled an expert. Just be in it as long as you can. When you're there, you can trust it and you're going to do amazing work. And so just notice when you pop out and say, hey, thank you, mind. I really appreciate you, but I need to get back into my intuition. And so, and you, I don't know if you read my latest post, but that idea, there are no mistakes, just learning.
Yes.
And that's basically a subset of Ram Dass, where he says, love everything first and then tell the truth. And so that's when I get lost, that's what I remember. I said, oh, wait a minute, no matter what's happening here, I'm going to love everything, even when I'm, quotes, not in alignment. I can still love that because it's teaching me something. And then I can, in love, it's easier for me to tell the truth because then there's no judgment. And so, that's really been helpful for me, is that just real simple guideline.
That really hits deep with me.
Oh, good.
Love them first, and then you can tell the truth. I think sometimes it's hard for me, especially during conflicts, that I get consumed into the chaos. I'm definitely not centered. And if I could just remember that, love them first, and then you can tell the truth,
Right.
versus kind of the projections that you naturally do, that everybody does,
Mm-hmm.
that often makes things worse. And so, thank you. That little golden nugget resonates deeply. And then, yes, and then once you love them first, then you can kind of see what's working or what's not. And I think for me, Kobe Bryant, the late and great Kobe Bryant, was someone that I looked up to. And he said there's no such thing as failure, because it's all a learning experience. And just because you
Exactly.
fail on Monday doesn't mean you're going to fail on Tuesday. But even if you do fail on Tuesday, that doesn't mean you're going to fail on Wednesday. It's about what you learned during the process and what you're willing to engage with so that you ultimately get where you want to be. And I think that's an important lesson to be reminded, because someone like myself growing up and really taking a charge on academics, there's this fear of failure, because when I didn't pass or get the grades that I wanted, there were repercussions for that. And so I've had to do my own work. And especially with business, those of us who start business, failure is part of the journey. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you have a crippling fear of failure and you're just scared to do anything because you're scared to fail, you're not going to make it very far. And so
No.
there's nothing wrong with that. But those of us who feel called to do this work, and there's many of us who start our own practices, we engage with that. We don't say, hey, it doesn't exist, but we've learned how to kind of accept those emotions and just recognize it's not the end of the world if you fail at something, right?
Right. And you can love the fear too, because that, if you love the fear, it's a check engine light. That's all it is. And, we always want to disconnect the check engine light, and it's just telling us where to go. So one of my things too is when I feel fear, that's exactly where I go, because it's telling me, oh, I'm attached to something, and the fear will tell me what I'm attached to. So it's a valuable piece of information if you know how to work with it. And fear will literally make you stupid.
Yeah.
It's, it's even me.
I love that. And I can tell that where I'm at in my life, in this current moment, I don't love the fear. I'm like, dude, this feels terrible. Let me get out of here.
Right.
But I think that's where the lesson is to be learned. And I think if I can learn to love the fear for when these, whether it be emotions or situations arise, if I love the situation, then I give myself permission to learn from it. Versus if I feel the fear and it feels just uncomfortable, I'm like, I don't want to do this. Then
Right.
I miss that opportunity to learn. And I can tell that that in and of itself is pointing you in the direction where you need to learn, because otherwise you're gonna repeat the lessons until you learn them. I think something you had said is in your first business, your traditional practice, where it's just driven by anxiety. And you talked
Hmm.
about, I had gotten to this place and I was living, quote unquote, the dream. But I think I have been in that place where it was like I was living the dream that I got sold, but it wasn't my dream.
Right.
And your body will tell you when it's doing something that is not authentically you. And you had gotten to this place where, man, you were living with anxiety every day and you felt like something was going to happen that was going to be very bad. And imagine going to the doctor like, man, I just feel like something bad is about to happen. They're going to prescribe you pills or something like that.
Which
But
turns off the check engine light. I mean, it's like taking your
yes.
car in and disconnecting the check engine light. Oh, we're good.
Yeah, and then you keep going forward. I think we have the willpower. I think that shows the strength of a human spirit is like you
Mhm.
can will your way through anything. But is that the path that's meant for you? And you have to be able to engage oh, well, I wanted this because I saw someone else have that. And I'm not saying it's not a reason to start something saying like, I'm in a miserable position. I want to get away or change my life so I don't have to be miserable. But also honoring, like, hey, things are coming, or my emotions are telling me I'm not in the path of alignment that is the best for myself. And
And
only,
that's a great awareness to
yes,
that. And that's why you love it, because it's preventing something worse from happening.
you
And
got it.
so, and so when that fear comes up, it's actually usually a very young version of yourself. And the reason you love it is then that fear feels safe to speak to you. And because it's usually embarrassed to tell you what it's attached to, because to your mind, it's something stupid and it's afraid of being judged. And so when you go in there very tenderly with yourself and you ask it, okay, fear, tell me what you're afraid is going to happen, you know, and then when it comes up, and into your mind, it might be something silly, but, just like a little kid, you don't treat it as silly. You say, oh, I understand, I hear you. And then you can bring your higher self in and say, look, let me take care of it. You don't have to take care of this. I got this. And then you integrate that part of yourself that's been separate from you. And that's the beauty of, body work. It can reach into these places where talk therapy can't get there. And that's why you want the emotion to come up, because there's valuable information there. And if you know how to work with it as an art, then that's where you get those deep shifts.
Absolutely. I think John says the inner journey isn't the most important journey, it's the only journey. And so, what
Right,
the inner journey is going back to your childlike essence and those things that you may be disassociated from to come to a place where you can engage with that child and say, hey, it's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be fearful. And
right.
then bring your higher self in and say, And now that you can feel that and you're in a safe place to feel it, let me take care of the rest. And then through that process, you shed these wounds that are subconscious. You don't even
Mm-hmm.
realize that you have those wounds. And then with that, you learn, especially through myofascial release, to feel that emotion, right? It
Right.
does oftentimes, like if I'm in a session, or at least early on, I was like, "Oh, this feels uncomfortable. I'm gonna change it." Whereas what I've learned now is just feel it. Just feel the tension. You don't have to relax or do anything else, but just feel it. And then where do you feel that in your body?
Well,
Now,
and you let your body move too. So the movement itself is information, and and I can tell when I'm treating somebody if I'm talking too much because I can feel it wanting to express, and I don't need to say any more things. Then you're just quiet and you let it surface. You just talk just enough to get people, into that space. And then after you experience it, then I do it like an integration. Then you can take maybe even several days later, then you can start to put it into a framework where you can be useful. And I'll give you an example from my own life. So I I had some anger come up, about 6 months ago about something I was going through, and I I realized it was my 17-year-old because my when I was 17, that's when I entered college, and I learned really quickly from bullies and stuff that you have to be tough. And I learned too that there was a strength in not caring what people thought. And so, once I kind of got to the end of my rope and I didn't care what people thought, I had a lot of anger. But anger served me because nobody messed with me, because I let that come out. And so my 17-year-old was starting to talk to me because I was letting people take advantage of me. And I'd realized that I was isolating my 70-year-old because he was angry. I was thinking, oh, I was judging it. I said, that's bad. And so I had a session, and all of a sudden he came in. He says, look, we've solved this long ago. Why are you going back and letting people, stomp on your rose garden? And and I had to apologize. He says, you're right, you're right. And I says, and the other thing I want to do too is I want to bring you forward and see what we've become. Look what you have done in the past, and you provided a platform, for me to do what I do now. So I invited my 17-year-old to come forward and be with me. And I realized I'd left him behind, you know, and so when he came in, all of a sudden I felt that integrate with me. And then all of a sudden I had this new confidence to set boundaries. And I didn't feel apologetic. I didn't feel bad. Where before I'd been setting boundaries out of principle, but then I'd spend 2 weeks feeling bad, like, oh, did I do the right thing? But then when my 17-year-old came in and he had such surety, like, we're not going to let people mess with us. That's just the bottom line. No discussion, And so when that came in, it was just such a creative way. It's a story, but it was a useful story for me to integrate that part of myself. And it wouldn't have come up unless I had really felt with my body and softened into that place to get that piece of information. Because my mind, if I look at that story, it seems silly. But when I'm feeling it, when I said that, hey, come forward, I could feel him feel invited in. And
mm,
that created an emotional shift. Even though it was a story in that moment, it was really powerful. And so, now I have that new gift. So, if I have a difficult patient or something in, I don't question it. I just say, no, that's not going to happen. It's just very matter of fact. And I don't have to go through all these mental gymnastics to get myself and look at the principles of setting boundaries and blah, 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 blah. I just do it, and into a flow.
yes. And thank you for sharing that. I think sometimes we think the inner journey or this childlike essence is those of us in those very early years, but you're even able to engage in this teenager version of yourself. And
Mhm.
let's say you're talking to someone like me who maybe has trouble feeling their emotions because I've always just been doing things my whole life. And you shared that you had a struggle with going from this linear side to your more intuitive side. How would you coach me along through that process?
So what I would say, I says, look, your non-linear side is still rational because, like John has this joke. He says, well, I mean, we have the research now, but in the past, he says, well, we get results with no research. You have the research, but no results. But results are empirical. I mean, that's the basis of research. And so, and I go through this in my book. I says, even if you don't know how something works, you can have a red button and you don't have to know all the electronics behind the red button. But if the red button opens the door for you, you push the red button. You don't wait 20 years to do a research study to get out of the door, to get out of the room. And so in the meantime, we're getting these results and we're practicing the art. And the same thing, if you're learning a musical instrument, when you hit that right tone that brings the tingles in the back of your neck, you're there. But there's no way to break that down into some kind of scientific study. So what you focus on that's why you have to do trial and error. You basically, if something's not working, shift until it works. And so John gives us the techniques of how to perceive what's happening. It's really simple. You treat where it's hot, hard, or tender. And if nothing's happening, move to a different spot. But what we do, we've been practiced. We'll do this one thing and it doesn't work, and say, "Well, I'm a beginner and I'm an idiot," and we go into this whole judgment cycle, which is a waste of energy. It serves no purpose, and so just shift, and just once you accept that that's part of the learning process. Well, I have a joke too. I says, "Look, if you knew how to do everything perfectly, you'd be God. You're not God. We're human beings. Trial and error is all we got. And you're probably going to do 100 trials before you get the right thing. But if you stop at every one and beat yourself up, it's going to take you forever."
Yeah.
And it's going to pull the energy out of your system. And I'll do this with myself. I have a joke I ask myself. I says, "Okay, is anybody dying? No, I think we're okay."
I love that. I think what I'm hearing is like, just take all of the pressure off that you put on yourself.
Exactly.
I had done an interview with Carol Davis, and she says traditional research with all the randomized controlled trials, which is kind of the gold standard for research, is built on a house of cards,
It
because
sure is.
we're saying a group of people is going to behave in this way, and we're going to use that as a reference point. But everyone changes, even from hour to hour, week to week.
Exactly.
We can reflect and say, man, I wasn't the same person I was then. So to create a research study and then use that as a reference point to say, hey, this is what worked for this population at this time, and then extrapolate that to the rest of the world is
Right.
just not going to get you the results that people are willing to pay for. And so I think we just want that to feel good about what we're doing, to say, okay, I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
But what we are learning in myofascial release, and if you're an MFR therapist or even just a client, it's what you're able to feel. There's this feeling intelligence that's available to all of us. And it's when we can soften and calm down the chatter in our heads that the answers get revealed to us, And then one thing that you had said that I think applies in the situation is, oftentimes we have insecurities when we're at the very beginning, because we're like, we don't know what to do. But even someone like yourself, who has had decades of experience, you'll say when you're getting treated and they tap into this wisdom or they make this shift, you turn everything off and you're trying to be a beginner again. And so it's that
Exactly.
feeling of being a beginner that is where you want to be. The difference between a master and a beginner is just being able to accept that you're feeling like a beginner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without the insecurity. And I think
Right.
that is where we're all trying to get to, where you're looking at things with new eyes. You're hearing things as if you heard them for the first time. And even when we repeat seminars, even though it's the same content, you're a different person. And so different things will resonate, or you'll hear John say things just tadly different. And you're like, oh, I didn't hear it like that the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that there is something that you've mentioned, that when we go to a seminar and there's a community of people, that energy gets amplified and it's very
Hmm.
subtle, right? And so that's why, at least
Or
for
not so
me,
subtle.
yeah, or not so subtle. When I take a seminar, especially when it's one taught by John, where he really masterfully uses his energy to influence the whole room, it feels different. Now, I haven't had a chance to take the DVD course yet, and I know that you produced it, but I would imagine because it's still his essence and because it's still a room full of therapists learning this work, that it gets a similar effect. Now, for me, I'm not going to steer away of John's energy because when he speaks, it definitely resonates a little bit deeper to me, and there's something about it being in the moment versus recorded. But for you, I guess what inspired you to want to even create the DVD course if you knew that John's energy was special and his essence was special in its own right?
Well, we filmed it with 5 cameras, and it's a unique experience because you have a seat in the house that's not possible physically. You literally have the best seat in the house all the time because of the way we focus the cameras. And so it is a unique experience. And I was a little worried that we wouldn't capture the essence, but we took a year to edit it, and I edited it with John and Donna. And so we were passing things back and forth. And so I think we came pretty close to really capturing it. And I've heard people say that, wow, the DVD course, they saw things that they hadn't seen. Because I do close-ups of his hands, and you can see his facial expressions, and you can see things that you wouldn't pick up necessarily if you were just sitting in a chair. And so, and I had a great team too. I brought in some guys that work with Warner Brothers. And so with the technology we had at the time, we caught it pretty well. But the other thing I wanted to comment too is, when you're in the flow, what you can do is treat your intuition like a compass. And that's very rational. And so, if you're trying to navigate and if you're feeling, that's the needle on the compass. And so what you do is this is what I do at least, as I'm working, I'll kind of subtly notice where the energy increases, and that will draw me just like the compass is just pointing that direction. And it can be energetic, it can be thermal, it can be emotional, and you have all of these things available when you're not in your mind and deducing. And so that gets pretty loud after you practice a while. And and that's why you get more confidence because it's so loud, it's unmistakable. It's like a lightning bolt on the horizon. And, it's just like, oh, that's where we're going. You don't know why. And I'll have my client say, well, why'd you go there? And I say, I don't know, but we're going there and we'll see what happens. And they can feel it too a lot of times. And I'll educate my clients too. So my long-term clients, we just start right in and we move through those spaces and we have these amazing experiences.
And I would also like to share that it's not absolutely necessary for you to have the answer. I think early on
Right.
when I was taking MFR seminars, I was notorious for being kind of an Aunt Sally question
Right.
asker. Like, how do you know? Where do you put your hands? What's the reason? Like just because that was what I was taught in PT school. And it's been a process, but it's like, if you don't have to know the answer, then what would you do? Right. And then you would just follow your intuition. It's lighting you up. And I think with more practice, what you're saying is you learn to trust this feeling because it becomes louder and louder. But in the beginning, you're kind of taking these baby steps because you're unsure. And so it just takes
Mhm.
practice. I think with anything in life, it just takes practice. And I know that you have experience with being a musician. I grew up playing the piano, and
Mhm.
there's a regimented practice for you to learn the keys. It's not just hitting the notes, but how do
Right.
you make your instrument sing? Can you
Right.
talk about being a musician and how that has influenced you as an MFR therapist?
Well, and that's why I chose the title of my book, The Music of Consciousness, because everything's vibrating. And so even though things aren't in the auditory range of frequencies, there's things like resonance and which is another word for harmony. And so if you've sang, Piano is kind of fixed. You just push the key, but there's a way of pushing the keys, that can create, different feelings by your rhythm a little bit and how you flow, whether it's legato or whether it's, the chords you choose. I love to play jazz, so I do a lot. I don't necessarily have to read music. That frees me up to basically choose the chords or how I want to arrange a song. And I do that by feel, and I just do it by what I like. But when you're dealing with something like the voice, you have to tune it. And so if you've ever done tuning, when you're out of tune, you get these beats that go da 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 da, and then you're in resonance. And the beautiful thing about resonance is that even if your volume is low, if you're in the resonant frequency of the object you're interacting with, that energy starts to flow into that other object, and it slowly gets louder and louder and louder and louder. That's why the long hold works, because you can do the mechanical long hold, but what I've realized, there's a frequency on the top of the barrier. And when I soften myself, I can't tell you exactly how that works, but I notice when I soften myself and I allow my frequency in my body to come in resonance with my client, I'll get that feedback. All of a sudden, the volume and you feel this field fill the room, and it's just pure bliss. And when you're flowing in that, and that's empirical, that's not woo-woo. When you feel that field, that's a thing you're feeling, and you're treating it as a compass. And what you do is you practice letting go, and your body will automatically come into resonance with the person that you're with when you soften. Think about it like if you have a guitar string, if you mute it, it's not going to vibrate. If you put your hand on it, it won't vibrate with, say, there's a subwoofer in the room that's doing some kind of low frequency. Well, if you put your hand on the string, it won't vibrate. All you have to do for that string to come in resonance with the frequency in the room is let it go. You don't have to do anything. And that's the same thing in the body, and both tactically, energetically, and emotionally. These are all, they feel to me like music. And so I just allow it, I let go and I allow it to come into harmony with what's happening in the room.
And I think the term that John uses in seminars is melding. He'll often say meld with each other. And that
Right.
is getting that same resonance. And then what you've so beautifully described is then you feel this expansion of energy. And that isn't woo-woo. I think when you come into this space, oftentimes because there's not that research, the channel 5 judgment says, oh, because it's not backed by research, then this is woo-woo. But it's not. The science is catching up, and it's important to trust and make sure you're doing it with the correct principles. I think oftentimes people will get into trouble when they try to put their own sauce or try to integrate it with different modalities, and it's not. It's its own standalone myofascial release. And if you aren't doing it John's way, where it's soften yourself, you have to hold it for at least 5 minutes. Longer, the better. Just like you said, like that creates this resonance that allows these anti-inflammatories to get released, these interleukins. And that is science. That's pure physiology. And what I love about the analogy you used with the guitar is, hey, we mute ourselves, right? Our guitar strings, we mute them because we're trying to figure things out. We're saying, what do we have to do? But if you let go of that and soften, you'll be able to resonate, and your guitar strings will just naturally vibrate because you're not getting in your own way.
Well, and you also open up what is like a Wi-Fi network. So it's not just vibration. There's information traveling on that wave. And, we scientifically, that's how Wi-Fi works. If you want to communicate on the network, you have to tune your node to the frequency of the Wi-Fi. And there's tons of information, like we're streaming. Look at the resolution that we're streaming over the web. And this is a mechanical thing. But when we look at the fascial system, it's trillions of times greater in terms of bandwidth. And so to think that nature hasn't figured this out before we figured out Wi-Fi is just ridiculous. And the thing is, we don't have a scientific instrument that can measure it, but we have a human body that can measure it. And to me, it's just so obvious. Like now I've just done it so much. I walk into the room, soften, boom, the field's there. And so I don't even think about arguing myself into it or performance anxiety. It's just like, and even if my client, a lot of times they can't feel it, big deal. I'm feeling it. And the stuff still happens, and I have techniques now too. I'll ask my client, what are you feeling? And they say nothing. That's a total exaggeration. I says, well, don't you feel the table under your, well, yeah. I said, well, that's not nothing, right? And so, and they laugh, they say, well, I thought well, what'd you think I meant? So, well, I don't know, and I says, okay. But I love that, and so I don't get performance anxiety if my client's not feeling it. I just know funny ways to kind of drop them in, and I've just done it so many times. And if somebody's really resistant, you can't force it, and they'll leave they just won't come back, but that's okay. It makes space for someone else, and I don't judge it. I just don't want to force anything. So I take those principles of not forcing to every layer in my life.
And I'm sure that it has profound impacts, because when we force things, they don't happen in the way that I think it's supposed to be done.
Right.
And maybe I'm using supposed in a linear sense, but
Or
I'll say
your
yes.
expectation is creating this.
You got it. It's the expectation you have, the expectation of living, quote unquote, the dream, but
Mhm.
you're miserable,
Right.
And
Right.
so I love what you had said, because I think it's easier for us as MFAR therapists who maybe have this natural ability to be aware of our bodies.
Mhm.
But we've often come across people who aren't as intuitive with their feeling, whether their bodies or emotions or both. And
Mhm.
so I've had definitely patients where I'll ask them, oh, what are you feeling? And they'll be like, I don't feel anything. And then you have to like coach them along. I was like, well, can you feel my hands? Oh, yeah, I feel that. Okay,
Mhm.
well, while you're feeling my hands, see if you can feel the space and what's happening in between, right?
Right.
And just get them to drop in, because oftentimes they're just out of their bodies. They're thinking about different things. And you
Right.
have, as the therapist, have to be able to sense that and then help them go back into it. You don't just say, hey, you're just terrible at this. That's
Right. Right.
your judgments. You're forcing your judgments. So
Well,
I
and
love
numbness is a feeling. That's why I tell people, they say, well, I just feel numb. I said, well, that's a good start, because numbness is a feeling. In fact, it's out of the shadow that all new things come. And so, again, it's a way of loving that part of them.
I love that, and even I just love the way that you carry yourself in terms of there is no pressure. So you don't feel performance anxiety. Oh,
No.
this person wasn't receptive. Cool. Well, they're just not going to come back. And that creates more space for the next person that wants to take that spot. It's not like, oh man, I did a terrible job and now they're
Right.
not coming back. It's like you just let that go, right?
Yeah.
Something that you had mentioned was your book, The Music of Consciousness and the Art of Myofascial Release.
Mm.
And something you had mentioned that you are kind of working through more recently is this transitioning from your mind to your heart. Can
Mm.
you elaborate on your insights on that?
Sure. I talked about this group experience that I woke up the next morning just in my mind and my fears. And so what I'm actually talking about, and this is emerging, and I think it's going to marry into the body work, is medicine work. So I had done a medicine journey the night before. And so if you've done medicine work, there is a teacher that accompanies plant medicines. And it's very similar to myofascial release in terms of the experience that you can have. In fact, doing this work has helped open me up I can create the medicine space without medicine. I can actually use the myofascial release to take people into that space. Because it's not the medicine that actually does it. It's actually what the medicine does. It takes your ego and puts it way in the background. And so then you're free of your fears. Then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I have these natural abilities to create this whole other awareness. And the way medicine works too, it doesn't force itself on you. In fact, the first time I did medicine work, I didn't notice anything because I was naturally resisting it, because I had an expectation that it was going to be something else. And by the time the end of the session, the facilitator said, well, are you feeling anything? And I'm sitting down. And so I said, well, let me check. Let me really check. And then I realized oh, I am feeling something. I feel what I feel when I'm treating, but I'm not touching anybody. I says, oh, that's what this is. And so it brought this different level of awareness. So at this particular ceremony, I woke up and the medicine only gave me access to my mind and my fears. And I started coming up with these stories, victim stories, and I thought I was in integrity. I thought I was this champion and I was going to tell the truth and I was going to confront blah, 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 blah. But I didn't realize that I was in pain at the same time because I'm just in my head. And then the medicine allowed my intuition to kick in. And so the intuition said, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. You might want to think this over a little bit. And then it allowed this layer. All of a sudden, my heart came in, and my heart was 180 degrees from my mind and my fears. And I realized, oh, if I'm truly going to be in integrity, I have to be both in intellectual integrity and emotional integrity. And I have to start with emotional integrity because love is what the world's made out of. And so if you don't start with that, you're going to be disconnected from the deep wisdom. And that is a purely empirical experience. I mean, it was such a contrast. And so what I felt like the universe gave me is this really clear lesson so that I would know clearly when I'm in my fear in my mind and when I'm in my heart and my intuition. And then my mind can be a servant of that, to carry out, because the mind can only deal with polarities. It can't be a source for understanding, but it's great at navigating polarities. But if you seed it with fear, it's just going to take fear down the rabbit hole. But if you seed it with love, then it's going to expand in how to, spread love even more intelligently, you know.
Absolutely. I think it's just another reminder. It's as if your plant medicine had done the same thing that your friend had done, or it was like, don't lie to
Right.
me. Don't lie to
Exactly.
me in physically, don't lie to me emotionally. And then I think what you said was important was make sure you're leading with your heart first, and then your mind
Yeah.
will follow.
Right.
Oftentimes we have that flipped around, and I
Hmm.
think we project fears onto ourselves of what if, this
Right.
what if that we don't have any clue of how it's going to play out because we're thinking in the future, versus something like myofascial release. It really gets us to be in this present moment. It very
Exactly.
much lets us know this is our reality. The past is gone, the future is yet to be. All we have is this present moment. And if you
Right. And
can
that
learn
future may never come. And so you experience all of these terrible things that never happen.
exactly. And so if you can let go of your headspace around that and say, hey, what is my heart telling me?
Right.
And allowing that to be the navigator, to follow the compass of your intuition,
Hmm.
that is where you will be able to use your mind in the way that it's supposed to be used. I think
Right.
John talks about channel 5 and channel 3, as we've mentioned,
Hmm.
and he's not saying don't like get rid of channel 5. He's
Right.
saying if you can be more channel 3, your channel 5 will get better, right? And I
Yeah,
think
it'll
that's
take
what
care
you're
of itself.
echoing. You got it. Perfect. Before we get out of here, is there any last thing you would like to share with my audience?
Well, I think one of the things that's been most powerful for me is to bring pleasure into the experience of treating. And this is another edge that because we're all so serious, and we think seriousness is where the real work happens. But what I've realized, particularly when I open up my connection to the feminine and the earth, and that energy is just, if I channel that pleasurable energy through my heart, like if I let it come up and through my heart and through my hands, I've noticed that that's the most powerful healing energy, is actually beauty and pleasure and these things that we kind of consider trivial, but they're not. They're, you know, I was taught that order and, perfection was the meaning of life. And, nobody's going to remember that. But people remember beauty. They remember things that hit them, in that higher plane, in the bliss, particularly when that energy is coming up through your body and you come into your head and it's like the spray of the ocean, and everything gets light, and then everything, you just feel everything expand. And when you're in that kind of golden light, and again, these words are so inadequate to describe the experience. And I would also encourage people to seek out community experiences on a regular basis. Because again, like I said, if we've been wounded in community, we have to heal in community. And I think that's what some of these medicine spaces are emerging, is to provide these community healing spaces. And then you can do it too without medicine. There's breath work, and then now myofascial release, and then maybe even more group kinds of myofascial release. I'm really glad to see the study groups emerging too, because that's going to bring us together. One of the things that I've made the mistake, I've been doing the lone wolf thing. And, I have a men's group that I get together with regularly, and they're very dear to me. They're my closest friends. And we share regularly, every week, and support each other. And I'm so much stronger from it. And I'm so much more in the flow. And, I feel them with me even now, like when I'm talking to you, my friends, and this connection that I have. It's like a web. Again, it's like this fascial web, but now it's a collective. It's more than just my body. It's my energetic connection to my community.
I love
So,
that.
yeah, that's what I'd like to leave you with.
No, I think that was beautifully stated. There is power in community, and I think a lot of us feel like we're isolated or we're just a
Mm,
little bit off, and there's just such a powerful energy that comes with community. I think I had read somewhere that, when there's a dog that's been abused or a horse that's been abused, the quickest way to help them rehab is just to put them with a healthy pack or with a
mhm.
healthy herd, because then they'll learn what the healthy way of doing things are that will repattern them, that you just can't do on your own. And
Right.
so make sure you seek those things out. If you catch yourself saying like, man, I just want to be by myself, do the lone wolf thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Definitely honor that, but also
Mhm,
put yourself into the communities, because those spaces are there. And then
mhm.
making sure that if you feel called to the medicine, that you respect the medicine. I did a podcast episode with Corey Cosgrove, and we talked about that. And I just want to make sure that you're not doing it as like a party way or doing anything like that. It's
Oh,
really,
no,
yeah,
it's very sacred. This is a very sacred space because the set and setting is essential, and integration too. You don't want to just open people up and then send them free. You have to have that integration. So I was very fortunate that I was invited in to, I mean, there's 20 years of experience with this group. And so the facilitators hold the space very lightly, very much like myofascial release. There's no forcing, but the space is held very securely, and there's good boundaries, and there's follow-up too. So that's, you're not just coming in and then opened up and then set free. So I was very fortunate to enter into that space. And it's a very heart-based medicine. So it's a very gentle entry. You hear all these stories where people have these amazing journeys, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the heart opening is really, I mean, we have some amazing healing that occurs there. And I brought the myofascial release work into the medicine space, and I've been teaching people how to do it. And in that space, they learn it right away. I mean, these are not even therapists, and they get it. It's just so amazing to watch. And the nice thing is, as I share it with them, I get to receive it back. And I've realized everybody has a gift for this. This is not just therapists that can do this. Anybody can learn how to flow into this work. And that's the beauty of myofascial release. It's a universal connection.
absolutely. And I think something that you've echoed is there's more to life than just figuring things out.
Right.
And then, okay, how do people find you?
Well, you can just look at richardharty.com, and I have my book, and then I do have a very inexpensive subscription to probably over 20 videos of my secret sauce. And so I did some mentoring, filmed some mentoring things, and it has a way to integrate joint mobilization and also how to create your own techniques, because, John has great techniques, but it has to go beyond that. You have to be able to create new techniques on the fly, and that's part of the intuition, because you're going to find things that, a protocol, even John's stuff isn't going to reach. And so I've expanded on, demonstrating kind of what goes through my head. I kind of open up the Pandora's box so you can kind of see, and they're real treatments. I actually have so that you see before and after, and it just kind of gives people a great starting place. And so it's like $25 a month, and you can have access to the whole thing. So there's a link there for that as well.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate you spending the time and energy to be open and honest with us. I know I've gotten a lot of golden nuggets out of this conversation alone, just loving my fear, that kind of stuff. And I appreciate the work that you've done. Richard produced What is Myofascial Release that he puts on YouTube, that I encourage those MFR therapists who are trying to create their own websites to use. And then just make sure you give him credit. I just link it straight to your YouTube video, but he's produced that. He's given us permission and has been gracious to allow us to share that. And by doing so, we spread more awareness about myofascial release. But I just want to thank you again for joining me on this podcast.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.